The first hint came at 3:47 UTC, when the orbital tracking systems at Narration detected an anomaly that defied every known law of astrophysics. Captain Alexis Rodriguez stood motionless, her reflection ghosting against the massive holographic display that dominated the underground command center. The room, a marvel of engineering buried 2,000 feet beneath the Colorado Rockies, hummed with a tension that felt almost alive. "Confirm positioning," she muttered, not taking her eyes off the display. Lieutenant Michael Rice worked his console, fingers dancing across haptic interfaces that seemed to breathe with each input. "Confirmed, Captain. Multiple hyperspace signatures. They're not just entering our solar system. They are materializing with impossible precision." The Zarkax Collective's fleet wasn't just approaching. They were announcing their presence with a level of technological sophistication that made humanity's most advanced systems look like children's toys. 12 massive vessels, each easily the size of Manhattan, shimmered into existence beyond Jupiter's orbit. Their biomechanical design defied conventional understanding. Part living organism, part machine, they pulsed with an inner light that seemed to bend reality around them. Rodriguez knew the briefing documents by heart. The intelligence gathered over 2 decades of covert monitoring had painted a terrifying picture of the Zarkax, a civilization that had conquered over 217 known star systems, a species that didn't just defeat other civilizations, they consumed them, culturally, technologically, biologically. Her earpiece crackled, an old-school analog communication device deliberately chosen for its inability to be electronically intercepted. "Global Silence Protocol is ready," came the voice of Colonel Marcus Bennett from another secure location. "Waiting on your mark." The room around Rodriguez was a study in controlled chaos. Dozens of personnel moved with a precision that suggested years of preparation. No panic, no fear, just cold, calculated readiness. On the main display, the Zarkax vessels began their approach vector. Most civilizations they'd encountered responded immediately, with terror, with desperate communication, with futile military responses. The Zarkax were used to breaking civilizations before they could even comprehend the invasion. Earth would be different. Communications blackout in 3. Rise announced, his voice steady. 2. 1. Like a light being switched off, every digital communication system on the planet went dark. Satellites fell silent. Cell towers became mute. The global internet, that vast, interconnected nervous system, vanished without a trace. To any external observer, it would look like total systemic collapse. In reality, it was humanity's first line of defense. The hidden global defense network, a system years in development. Activated. Mechanical relays replaced digital switches. Quantum encrypted local networks, completely isolated from traditional communication infrastructure, began to pulse with information. To the Zarkax, Earth would appear as a dark, silent world. Rodriguez allowed herself a momentary glance at the secondary monitor. Live feeds from around the world showed cities continuing to function. Traffic lights worked. Power grids remained stable. Hospitals operated, but not a single electromagnetic signal would escape the planet's atmosphere. "Reconnaissance drones approaching," Lieutenant Rice reported. "They're beginning initial scanning protocols." On the massive display, holographic representations of the alien drones began to map their approach vectors. Each movement was calculated, precise, the kind of technological superiority that had crushed countless civilizations before humanity. They would soon learn that superiority was about to become their greatest weakness. Colonel Bennett's voice returned in her earpiece. "First stage psychological disruption is ready. Awaiting confirmation." Captain Rodriguez's hand hovered over the activation panel. Years of preparation, decades of secret research. Humanity's most ambitious defensive strategy was about to be tested. The Zarkax thought they were approaching a silent, defenseless world. They were wrong. Her fingers pressed the activation sequence. And so it began. Aboard the Zarkax command vessel Voidbreaker, Grand Analyst Krulax dealt something unprecedented ripple through the collective consciousness: uncertainty. The bioneural interfaces that typically hummed with instantaneous communication between crew members had gone eerily quiet. Billions of telepathic tendrils, designed to probe and dissect the psychological landscape of every civilization they'd encountered, found nothing. No fear, no panic, no resistance, just silence. Initiate primary communication protocols, Krulax commanded, their multi-layered vocal apparatus producing a sound that was part speech, part electromagnetic pulse. Around them, the living ship's organic circuitry pulsed and shifted, preparing to unleash communication methods that had broken civilizations across 200 star systems. The first wave was a telepathic assault, a technique that had reduced advanced species to quivering, submissive populations in mere moments. Psychic probes capable of parsing the deepest fears, the most intimate memories, the fundamental psychological weaknesses of an entire species launched toward Earth. They crashed against something impossible. Deep within the Colorado mountain complex, Dr. Emily Nakamura watched the alien communication attempts with a predatory smile. The psychic dampening technology, developed through decades of black-budget research, quantum computing, and insights from the world's most advanced neuroscientists, was working perfectly. They're using a multi-spectrum telepathic assault, she reported to Colonel Bennett, her fingers dancing across a console that looked more like an elaborate musical instrument than a communication device. Frequency modulation is holding. They can't penetrate. Bennett's voice crackled through her analog communication device. Keep it steady. Let them exhaust themselves. On the Void Breaker, confusion began to spread. Krulax felt the first tremors of something they hadn't experienced in centuries: fear. The second communication attempt was more aggressive: quantum entanglement messaging, a technology so advanced it could theoretically transmit information across infinite distances instantaneously, began bombarding every conceivable communication point on Earth. Mathematical sequences, cultural recognition patterns, diplomatic protocols developed over millennia of galactic conquest. Silence. Lieutenant Michael Rice watched the incoming signals on his isolated monitoring system. Each alien transmission was automatically captured, analyzed, and then absolutely nothing was sent in response. It was like watching a master chess player refuse to even acknowledge the opponent's moves. "They're getting desperate," Rice muttered to Captain Rodriguez. Indeed, the Zarkacs were experiencing something completely foreign to their collective experience. Every other civilization they'd encountered responded with predictable patterns: terror, resistance, negotiation, submission. Humanity was writing an entirely new rulebook. Aboard the Void Breaker, junior analysts began to whisper, a rare occurrence in a species that typically communicated through pure thought. The whispers carried an emotion that had been bred out of their civilization generations ago: doubt. Krulax initiated the third wave of communication attempts. Radio signals across every known and theoretical frequency. Optical communication methods. Gravitational wave transmissions. Signals so complex they could decode the psychological profile of an entire species in milliseconds. More silence. Dr. Nakamura watched the incoming transmissions with clinical detachment. Each alien communication method was being studied, recorded, analyzed, and then absolutely nothing was being returned. It was psychological warfare in its purest form. "They're trying everything," she reported. "And I mean everything. We're seeing communication protocols that theoretically shouldn't even exist." Colonel Bennett's response was characteristic in its brevity. "Hold position. Let them break first." The Zarkacs had a critical weakness they didn't yet understand. Their entire civilization was built on instantaneous total communication. The ability to know, to understand, to predict, it was their greatest strength. And humanity had just turned it into their most devastating vulnerability. Aboard the Void Breaker, Krulax felt something they hadn't experienced in generations: panic. The silence was not an absence of communication. It was a weapon. and humanity was just getting started. The first Zarkax dropships pierced Earth's atmosphere like molecular knives, their biomechanical hulls shimmering with adaptive camouflage that could theoretically render them invisible to any known detection system. Major Rebecca Chen watched from the underground command center, her hands hovering over a series of mechanical switches that looked more like something from a World War II submarine than a modern defense system. 12 primary dropships, Lieutenant Reyes reported. Approach vector suggests primary landing zones in North America, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. Major Chen's lips tightened. Textbook invasion pattern. They're expecting resistance. They're expecting communication. They would get neither. The dropships descended through layers of atmosphere, each vessel a marvel of technological superiority that had crushed hundreds of civilizations. Inside, Zarkax invasion troops prepared for their standard pacification protocol, a method that had never failed in over 2 centuries of galactic conquest. As they breached the final atmospheric layer, something was wrong. No missile launches, no radio communications, no electronic warfare signatures, just silence. Major David Rodriguez, no relation to Captain Alexis Rodriguez, stood in a modified underground bunker beneath the Nevada desert. Around him, a network of autonomous defense systems waited. These were not your standard military installations. Each was a self-contained unit, powered by mechanical systems that could operate completely independently, with no central communication network to compromise. The first Zarkax dropship touched down in a wheat field outside Omaha, Nebraska. Silence. Then movement. A single autonomous tank, looking more like a mechanical spider than a traditional armored vehicle, emerged from a hidden underground position. Its targeting systems were purely mechanical. No radio signals, no digital guidance, just precise, analog calculation. 3 plasma cannons emerged from hidden positions around the landing site. They weren't connected to any central system. Each was its own independent unit, with mechanical targeting computers that the Zarkax couldn't possibly predict or hack. The first dropship's hull began to dissolve, preparing to disgorge invasion troops. The mechanical spider tank fired. 3 plasma rounds struck the dropship with impossible precision. Each projectile found exactly the right molecular weakness in the vessel's adaptive biomechanical hull. The ship didn't explode. It came apart at the molecular level, disintegrating in a cascade of impossible physics. In orbit, the Zarkax command ship watched in total confusion. More dropships landed. More autonomous defense systems emerged from hidden positions. No 2 responses were the same. No pattern could be discerned. It was as if the entire planet was a living, breathing defensive organism with no central nervous system to attack. A dropship in the mountains of Peru found itself trapped in a landslide that seemed almost intentionally triggered. Another in the Australian outback was systematically dismantled by a swarm of modified mining robots that moved with impossible coordination. "They're using our own infrastructure against us," Lieutenant Reyes muttered, watching the holographic display. Major Chen nodded. Exactly. Each autonomous system was a puzzle. Each defense mechanism was unpredictable. The Zarkax had conquered civilizations by understanding their communication, by finding their psychological weak points, by breaking their will to resist. Humanity offered nothing to understand. In orbit, Grand Analyst Krellax felt something unprecedented rippling through the collective consciousness. Doubt. Fear. The realization that they might have finally encountered a civilization that didn't play by any known rules of engagement. For the first time in 200 years, the Zarkax collective was experiencing true uncertainty. And humanity was just getting started. Emily Nakamura's fingers traced the intricate mechanical encryption device, a masterpiece that looked more like an antique music box than a communication tool. Around her, the hidden communications center beneath San Francisco hummed with a quiet intensity that would have been invisible to any external observer. "Cycle complete," she murmured to herself. Across the globe, hundreds of similar stations activated, not through digital signals, not through radio waves, but through a system so archaic and complex that the Zarkax couldn't even conceive of its existence. In Tokyo, a bicycle messenger received a seemingly innocuous package. To any casual observer, it was nothing more than an old wooden box with intricate mechanical gears. But when the messenger turned a specific series of internal mechanisms, a message was encoded, transmitted through pure mechanical precision. A coffee shop in Buenos Aires, a fishing boat off the coast of Norway, a research station in Antarctica. Each location held a piece of humanity's true communication infrastructure. Colonel Marcus Bennett watched from his isolated command center as the network came to life. Years of preparation, decades of secret development, a communication system that existed entirely outside the realm of digital technology, invisible to any electronic scanning method. The Zarkax had conquered civilizations by understanding their communication networks. They'd developed technologies that could parse entire planetary communication systems in milliseconds. They could crack encryption, break through quantum communication barriers, and predict social behaviors with terrifying accuracy. But they had never encountered a system that wasn't a system at all. Each mechanical communication device was unique. Each transmission method was different. Some used advanced mechanical encryption that required precise physical interactions. Others used quantum-entangled mechanical relays that could transmit information through pure physical manipulation. A teenager in Mumbai turned a series of gears in a small brass device. In Vancouver, an elderly librarian pressed a sequence of buttons on what appeared to be an antique adding machine. A fisherman in Cape Town adjusted the tension on a series of precisely machined pulleys. Each action was a message. Each movement was communication. The Zarkax had no way to intercept or understand. Status report. Bennett spoke into an analog communication device, a modified World War I-era field telephone that used physical wire connections. Defensive positions are active, came the response. Infrastructure protection protocols are online. It wasn't just a communication network. It was a living, breathing organism of human coordination. Major Rebecca Chen studied the global map. Each mechanical communication point was a node in a network more complex than any digital system could ever be. No central control, no predictable pattern, just a web of human coordination that defied every known principle of communication. In orbit, the Zarkax command ship grew increasingly frustrated. Their most advanced scanning technologies found nothing. No digital signals. No radio waves, no quantum communication markers. It was as if the entire planet had gone dark, and yet they could see cities functioning, infrastructure operating, people moving about their lives. It's impossible, Grand Analyst Krelax muttered, a rare verbal communication breaking through their typical telepathic interactions. Impossible was humanity's specialty. The mechanical communication network was just the first layer. Beneath it lay even more complex systems. Analog computer networks, mechanical data storage devices, communication methods that predated electronic technology by decades. Each message was a puzzle. Each transmission was a work of art. The Zarkax had conquered civilizations by understanding their weaknesses. Humanity was showing them that weakness could be the most powerful strength of all. And they were just beginning to fight back. The first cracks appeared in the Zarkax collective consciousness, 3 standard solar cycles after their invasion began. Grand Analyst Krelax felt it before anyone else, a tremor of uncertainty that rippled through the living neural networks connecting every member of their species. For 2 centuries, the Zarkax had perfected the art of psychological warfare. They could dissolve civilizations before a single weapon was fired, breaking their target's will through telepathic assault, emotional manipulation, and absolute technological superiority. Humanity offered nothing to manipulate. In the isolation chambers of the Void Breaker's command ship, junior analysts began to experience something unprecedented. Doubt, fear. These were emotions that had been systematically bred out of their species generations ago. Yet here they were, spreading like a quantum virus through their collective consciousness. We cannot parse their response, one analyst whispered. An actual vocalization. which was itself a sign of their growing psychological instability. Krulax understood the fundamental terror of their situation. Every civilization they'd encountered had a psychological blueprint. Fears, desires, collective traumas, weak points that could be exploited, manipulated, destroyed. Humanity presented an absolute void, a psychological landscape that defied every known method of analysis. Dr. Emily Nakamura had designed it that way. The psychological dampening technologies developed in secret laboratories around the globe were more than just defensive mechanisms. They were a complete reimagining of how a species could protect its collective mental landscape. Aboard the Void Breaker, telepathic communication channels began to fracture. Normally, the Zarkax experienced thought as a seamless, instantaneous collective experience. Now, each attempt to reach out met with a kind of psychic white noise, a deliberate, engineered emptiness that was more terrifying than any direct resistance. Major Rebecca Chen watched the developing psychological warfare from her underground command center. "They're breaking," she said quietly to Colonel Bennett, "faster than we predicted." The Zarkax had a critical vulnerability they didn't yet understand. Their entire civilization was built on total, instantaneous communication. The ability to know, to understand, to predict and control. It was their greatest strength, and humanity had turned it into their most devastating weakness. Psychological profiles recovered from previous conquests showed a species that had eliminated individual thought centuries ago. The Zarkax were a true collective, each member a node in a vast, living neural network. They didn't just communicate, they were communication. And now, that communication was being systematically dismantled. Lieutenant Michael Reyes monitored the subtle changes. Each Zarkax communication attempt was a study in increasing desperation. Where once they had sent precise, calculated telepathic probes, now their signals became erratic, emotional, almost human. "They're losing cohesion," Reyes reported. In orbit, the living ships began to show physical manifestations of their psychological breakdown. Biomechanical systems pulse irregularly. Communication nodes flickered and died. For the first time in their history, individual Zarkax began to experience something close to individual consciousness. Krulax felt the first true moment of personal fear in their existence. What if communication was not a strength, but a vulnerability? What if silence could be weaponized? What if humanity had discovered something fundamental about consciousness that the Zarkax had forgotten millennia ago? The isolation was methodical, precise. Each telepathic assault was met not with resistance, but with a kind of psychic null space, a void so complete that it began to eat away at the Zarkax's collective understanding of reality. They had broken civilizations by understanding their deepest fears. Humanity was breaking them by offering nothing to understand. No fear, no anger, no resistance, just a silence so complete it was becoming a weapon beyond comprehension. And the Zarkax were beginning to shatter. The first strike came from a research station in the middle of the Atacama Desert. Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, a biotechnology specialist who had spent the last decade working on what the world believed was obscure viral research, activated a series of quantum-entangled infiltration systems that had been years in development. To call them a weapon would be an understatement. They were precision instruments of biological and technological disruption. The Zarkax didn't understand what hit them. Aboard the Void Breaker, the first signs of infiltration were subtle. A minor fluctuation in a biomechanical communication node, a microscopic deviation in the ship's living circuitry. Each infiltration was so precise, so mathematically perfect, that it appeared almost natural, like a mutation rather than an attack. Colonel Marcus Bennett watched from his isolated command center, a ghost of a smile playing across his weathered features. Stage 1 initiated. He spoke into an analog communication device that looked like it belonged in a museum. The infiltration systems were unlike any weapon in human history. They weren't just viruses or technological exploits. They were living, adaptive systems that could navigate the most complex biomechanical environments with impossible precision. Developed through decades of black-budget research, they represented the pinnacle of human biological and technological understanding. On the surface, it looked like nothing was happening. In reality, humanity was dismantling the Zarkax from within. Each infiltration system was a marvel of engineering, quantum-encoded, capable of adapting to the most complex biological systems, designed to exploit weaknesses that the Zarkax didn't even know they had. Major Rebecca Chen monitored the global coordination. This wasn't a traditional military operation. It was a surgical strike conducted across multiple dimensions of warfare: biological, technological, psychological. The Zarkax living ships began to experience the first signs of systemic failure. Communication nodes began to flutter. Biomechanical systems started to show inexplicable mutations. Where once there was perfect collective coordination, now there were glitches. Grand Analyst Krelax felt the first true moment of terror. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Dr. Emily Nakamura worked from a hidden facility beneath San Francisco, her fingers dancing across a console that looked more like an elaborate musical instrument than a communication system. Each input was a precision strike, not just against the Zarkax's technological infrastructure, but against their fundamental understanding of reality. Infiltration is at 37% effectiveness, she reported to Bennett. The attack was multidimensional. Technological systems were compromised. Biological networks were subtly altered. Psychological communication channels were being systematically dismantled. A mining robot in the Australian outback, a satellite maintenance drone in low Earth orbit, a deep-sea research vessel in the Pacific. Each became a vector of infiltration, a precise point of attack that seemed completely inconsequential on its own. But nothing was inconsequential. Lieutenant Michael Reyes tracked the progression. "They won't even know they're being attacked," he muttered. "By the time they realize, it'll be too late." The Zarkax had conquered civilizations by understanding their weaknesses, by breaking their will, by dismantling their technological and psychological defenses. Humanity was showing them a new kind of warfare. No explosions, no traditional weapons, just a silent, precise dismantling of everything they believed made them invincible. Aboard the Voidbreaker, the first true signs of systemic failure began to emerge. Communication nodes flickered. Biomechanical systems showed inexplicable mutations. The living ship was becoming something else, something neither human nor Zarkax. Grand Analyst Krelax realized the terrifying truth. They were no longer in control. Humanity's counterattack had begun, and silence was their most powerful weapon. The truth emerged not with a dramatic declaration, but with a series of calculated revelations that would reshape the understanding of human potential. Deep within the Zarkax command ship, Grand Analyst Krelax accessed what they believed was a captured human data cache. What they found instead was a meticulously constructed psychological trap, a window into humanity's true nature that was simultaneously a weapon and a message. Files began to unfold, not digital records, but carefully curated historical documents, research logs, and strategic analyses that painted a terrifying picture. Humanity had been preparing for this moment not for years, but for decades, perhaps centuries. Every major technological advancement, every seemingly random research project, every seemingly unconnected scientific breakthrough, they were all pieces of a grand, impossible strategy. Climate change research that developed adaptive environmental technologies, pandemic response protocols that created unprecedented global coordination mechanisms, quantum computing advances that explored communication beyond traditional understood limits, artificial intelligence research that investigated the nature of consciousness itself. It wasn't just preparation. It was a species-wide evolutionary strategy. Dr. Emily Nakamura watched from her hidden command center, a sense of profound satisfaction washing over her. The revelations were calculated, each piece of information designed to do more than just inform. They were designed to break the Zarkax's understanding of what a civilization could be. The files revealed research projects that defied conventional scientific understanding, psychological adaptation techniques that could fundamentally alter human perception, communication protocols that existed outside traditional technological frameworks, biological modification research that pushed the boundaries of human potential. Colonel Marcus Bennett's voice crackled through an analog communication device. Revelation protocol initiated. Across the globe, hidden research facilities began to activate. Not with weapons, not with traditional military systems, but with pure, unadulterated knowledge. The Zarkax had conquered civilizations by understanding their weaknesses. Humanity was showing them that weakness could be the most profound strength imaginable. Major Rebecca Chen studied the global coordination. This wasn't just a military strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of what a species could be. Every seemingly random technological development was a piece of a much larger puzzle. Quantum communication research that had appeared disconnected now revealed itself as a global network more complex than any technological system. Biological adaptation studies showed humanity's capacity to fundamentally alter its own capabilities. Psychological research demonstrated methods of collective coordination that defied everything the Zarkax understood about communication. Lieutenant Michael Rice tracked the information cascade. "They're not just seeing our technology," he muttered. "They're seeing our potential." The revelations were designed to do more than just defeat the Zarkax. They were meant to fundamentally challenge their understanding of what an intelligent species could be. Aboard the Void Breaker, Grand Analyst Krelax experienced something unprecedented. Fear transformed into something else. Respect. Awe. A fundamental recalibration of everything their civilization believed about technological and evolutionary potential. Humanity hadn't just prepared to resist. They had prepared to evolve. Each revealed document was a weapon. Each research log a strategic strike. The Zarkax were experiencing the most profound psychological warfare imaginable, a complete dismantling of their understanding of intelligent life. The files showed something terrifying. This wasn't just a defense against invasion. This was a species-wide strategy of evolutionary adaptation that had been developing for generations. Global coordination mechanisms that could activate instantaneously. Psychological adaptation techniques that could fundamentally alter human perception. Technological research that existed at the bleeding edge of scientific understanding. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were transforming. And the Zarkax were witnessing the birth of something entirely new. A species that didn't just adapt. A species that evolved on demand. The retreat of the Zarkax was not a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet dissolution. A systematic withdrawal that felt more like a collective psychological collapse than a military defeat. Captain Alexis Rodriguez watched the holographic display in the underground command center. The alien fleet didn't flee in panic. They disintegrated, their living ships breaking apart at molecular levels, communication networks collapsing from within. It was a death not of violence, but of fundamental understanding. Colonel Marcus Bennett's voice crackled through an analog communication device. "Confirm fleet dissolution," he said, his tone more administrative than triumphant. Across the globe, humanity remained unchanged. No celebrations, no declarations of victory, just a return to an apparent normalcy that was anything but normal. In orbit, the remnants of the Zarkax collective experienced something unprecedented. Not defeat, not destruction, but a fundamental reimagining of their entire existential understanding. Dr. Emily Nakamura began the process of archiving the encounter, not as a military victory, but as a scientific breakthrough of cosmic proportions. Each piece of recovered data was a treasure, a window into a form of resistance that transcended traditional warfare. The Galactic community, those civilizations that had watched the Zarkax's centuries-long campaign of conquest, observed in absolute silence. What had just happened? A small research station in the Atacama Desert began processing the first comprehensive analysis. Lieutenant Michael Rice coordinated the initial data compilation, his fingers moving with a precision that suggested years of preparation. The revelations were staggering. Humanity hadn't just defended itself. It had demonstrated a form of collective adaptation that defied every known principle of species development. The technologies recovered from the encounter suggested something more profound than a simple military victory. This was evolution in real time. Major Rebecca Chen reviewed the initial psychological profiles. The Zarkax hadn't just been defeated. They had been fundamentally altered. Their collective consciousness, once a seemingly impenetrable network of total communication, had been transformed into something fractured, individual, uncertain. It wasn't about winning, Chen muttered to herself. It was about showing them a different way of existing. The global communication network, that complex system of mechanical and quantum-entangled communication methods, began to slowly disassemble itself, not out of fear or necessity, but as a carefully orchestrated process of returning to a state of apparent normalcy. Across different research facilities, scientists began to compile the first comprehensive reports. The encounter wasn't just a military engagement. It was a fundamental philosophical confrontation. Humanity had weaponized its greatest perceived weakness, its apparent lack of unified communication, its seeming technological fragmentation, and turned it into the most sophisticated defensive strategy imaginable. The Zarkax had conquered civilizations by understanding their fears, their communication patterns, their psychological vulnerabilities. Humanity had shown them that the greatest vulnerability was the assumption of understanding. As the last alien vessels dissolved in orbit, a strange calm settled over the planet. No global broadcast, no diplomatic communique, just a silent acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. Years of preparation, decades of research, generations of strategic thinking, all culminating in a moment that would redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. The galactic community would spend generations trying to understand what had happened. How could a civilization appear so fragmented, so seemingly vulnerable, and yet present such a comprehensive defense? Captain Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of reflection. This wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. We are not what you think we are. We are what we choose to become. As the last traces of the Zarkax fleet disappeared, humanity returned to its daily rhythms. Cities hummed. Research continued. Life moved forward. But something had fundamentally changed. The universe had learned a new lesson. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the most powerful communication of all.